Hello, my name is Robin Donaldson, and I am the Chief Operations Officer at Indiana Youth Service Association. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the 2021 IYSA Professional Development Retreat, Connecting with Your Inner Child. This retreat cannot be possible without your presence and support, and we hope that you are excited to hear from our speakers. A few housekeeping items before we begin. Your certificate of attendance will be available only after the session is watched in its entirety and the evaluation is completed. The evaluation will be available at the end of this presentation. If you need CEUs, please email me directly at rdonaldson@indysb.org. A shareable version of all training materials will be made available once the conference has concluded. And if you have any issues accessing this session or any of the other materials, please again email me at rdonaldson@indy.org. I am so glad you're joining me for my session, Healing Through Sensory Grounding. For those of you who don't know me, I am the COO at IYSA, which is a member organization that provides training and support to the youth service bureaus across the state of Indiana. I have been in the youth service field for almost 30 years, 12 of which I spent at the Youth Service Bureau of Monroe County in Bloomington, Indiana. And I have been teaching psychology classes for the last 20 years. So at Ivy Tech Community College of Indiana, so that's since 2001. I have a master's degree in counseling and social psychology, and I am currently a PhD candidate in industrial and organizational psychology at Adler University. I just finished my graduate certification in applied educational neuroscience at Butler University, and I am a former licensed mental health counselor and foster care parent, and the mother of 4 boys and a granddaughter. So with that, we are going to go ahead and start the presentation, Healing Through Sensory Grounding. And just to be clear, we want to kind of go over what the objectives are. We are going to do a little bit of review of neuroscience research on the stress response and the impact of trauma on the brain. We are going to look at challenging youth behaviors through this new perspective of neuroscience and the ARC model. And then I'm going to spend a lot of time really offering concrete and practical strategies to help calm and kind of regain connection with dysregulated youth and build coping strategies. All right, so we're going to start with really kind of understanding brain functioning and the fact that the brain is, kind of simplified, divided into 3 different parts. The first part is the lower part, so the brain develops from the bottom up, inside out, and the first part of the brain is the brainstem. So this is the red part you see it on the slide, and this is called the survival brain. This really is focused only on keeping us alive, and it's always asking the question, am I safe? The next part is the middle part of the brain that's called the limbic system or midbrain. And this is the kind of the emotional part of our brain. It processes emotions, it processes the stress response, and is always asking the question, am I loved? The last part of the brain to develop is the prefrontal cortex. So the cortex is this top part. The green part is the prefrontal cortex, located right here behind our temples. And this is our thinking brain. This is the part of the brain that we use when we're learning, when we're making important decisions in a calm state. And this asking, what can I learn from this? And so we're going to talk about kind of what goes on with children and young people when they're dysregulated in these 3 different parts of the brain: the survival brain, the emotional brain, and the thinking brain. It's important to understand that the brain development is dependent upon the early environment. And really the very first year lays the groundwork for how we are going to respond to stress and anything that demands some type of stress response system. So when we have a very loving, caring, nurturing background, all of those early kind of wiring that occurs is going to be this bottom part here. So we start with the neutral state. I'm not sure why that's upside down, but in a safe world, we really kind of process things in terms of relationships. And there's a really strong connection that is laid for us to be able to deal with stress and manage stress. However, when we are in an environment where it is dysregulated, when the adults in our life are dysregulated, maybe they're not responding appropriately to our needs, and in fact may be abusive, then at this point, the part of the brain that's really going to be focused and the wiring is that's going to be an activity that's going to be occurring is in that survival part of the brain. It is all about keeping the infant, the child safe. It's going to be wired more extensively. That's going to be more connected. And that's going to be the first response that we go to. So really, when this happens, we are looking at kind of only looking out for ourselves under the worst circumstances. So we're really wired to expect the world to be unsafe. We're wired to expect that we are going to have to take care of our own safety, as opposed to down here where we're wired for connection and we can trust other people, that they might be able to help us out. Conversely, it does make us a little bit more vulnerable in those very dysregulated and unsafe conditions. Because of this, there is a difference in the learned stress response. So for those children that have this really nurturing background, that have parents who are meeting their needs appropriately, they will be able to develop what's typically called a normal stress response, which is this one down here. So, again, the brain is wired for connection. It's wired to be able to kind of be able to learn and to feel safe. And in that point, the parasympathetic nervous system or the ventral vagal system, nerve is kind of in control. We are calm. We are able to learn. We're in the moment. It's safe to be curious and open and be compassionate with other people. So it's all about those kind of relationships pieces. And then when something happens that threatens us, that threatens our safety, that's fearful, and then we're going to be kicked up into the sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system is all about, again, kind of keeping us safe. We're going to activate different parts of the brain. It will increase blood flow. It really does activate, again, that kind of survival brain. And says, hey, we need to pay attention. We need to get more oxygen in our body. We need to get more blood flowing to our extremities so that we can either take off or we can fight whatever's going on. And we do have a predisposition for one or the other, so very fight or flight. So a lot of times you will see kids who respond to stressful situations by being panicked. They're fearful. A lot of times this will show up as anxiety or worry. And that's kind of this flight. So we're moving away from whatever threat is in our environment. The other part of this, the flip side, is the fight, and that's movement toward. So this time, these kids are going to confront a stressful or fearful situation with anger or rage, irritation and frustration. You're going to see this, but this is all about being able to, I don't know if you guys can see this, but it says, I can. It's all about meeting that threat and doing something about it to get away from or make it go away so that we are safe again and that we can kind of go back down to this parasympathetic nervous system, which is really the healthiest place to be because it maintains all of our just kind of automatic processing of our bodies. The breathing will go down, heart rate will go down. Again, that's better for us. We will, again, kind of deactivate this immune response, or reactivate, sorry, because in fight or flight, we deactivate the immune response. So we can reactivate the immune response to deal with threats and illnesses and things that are coming in. This is the normal, healthy development of a stress response system when a young person has caring, responsive, and appropriate caregivers. In that situation in where the home is dysfunctional, where parents are not appropriately responsive, maybe even abusive, what's going to happen is that we get a change in the stress response. So if there is a stressor and we're not able to deal with it and come back down here, another stressor happens, which is very often is what's going on in a chaotic or dysfunctional home. And we just kind of continue to build till we get to the point of the freeze. And so the freeze is a third stress response that is going to be activated when we have a number of smaller stressors that build one on the other, and we're not able to deregulate, to kind of calm ourselves back down. Or it can also happen when there is a stress that is so overwhelming and maybe even just life-threatening, or is perceived as life-threatening, that we can go from here all the way up to here. So this would be like a life-threatening injury. It could be a sexual assault. It could be a physical attack where we feel like there's nothing we can do. And so it's kind of characterized by this: I can't. I'm not strong enough. I can't run fast enough. I can't deal with this situation. The person, whatever it is bigger than me. And at this point, the body will and the brain will kind of immobilize. So that's why we call this the freeze situation. At this point, we're going to increase fuel storage and insulin activity. We're also going to have an increase in endorphins, because endorphins numb and kind of numb pain, so that we're not feeling all of the horrible things that are happening to us. And then we get a decrease in heart rate, blood pressure. We get a decrease in temperature. What's really important is there's a decrease in muscle tone, which means we can't fight, we can't run away. And all of this is meant to keep us safe. So we lose the ability, we have a decrease in emotions. We have a decrease in our ability to express emotions through facial expressions. We will lose eye contact. All of these things happen because our body is focused on surviving. Whatever threat is going on, we're focused on surviving and getting through that so that we can live to the next day. So a lot of times what happens in this particular situation, whether it is caused by a small number of, a large number of small threats, or like one huge big threat, is that we see disassociation, a lot of depression. We will see, again, kind of this conservation of energy, but people will also talk about feeling helpless or hopeless, and a lot of shame, because they feel like, and very often in our society, we talk about fighting things off, like we're supposed to be able to fight everything off, which is completely unrealistic for anyone, but especially for children. And so because they didn't fight, because they didn't run away, because they didn't tell someone, whatever, they feel this shame. So helping kids understand that this is a very normal body response that is actually in place to keep us keep us alive, to help us survive, can kind of take away some of that shame or blame. But when we have, kids who are living constantly in this dysfunctional environment, in these life-threatening situations, time and time again, what happens is their stress response gets reset into this unhealthy pattern where they kind of live here in this high anxiety, high frustration, high anger state. And the smallest thing will kind of, again, trigger this freeze response. And so this is a lot of times when we are working with kids who have difficult behavior, this is why, because they're living here in this fight, flight, or freeze response place, as opposed to down here in the parasympathetic nervous system, where they can connect, they can be in the present. The good news is this can be reset and this can be relearned. And that's why you guys are here and what we're going to talk about. It is important to understand that when children are wired for survival, when they're living in that fight, flight, freeze, stress response, it has a very real impact on the ARC model. And so the ARC stands for attachment, regulation, and competency. And all of these things really are based again on that early, early attachment, that early bonding experience that we have with our primary caregivers. So we're going to look at some specific behavioral challenges that occur when children live in a dysfunctional or abusive home, a lot of adverse childhood experiences, and kind of subsequent behavior based upon this ARC model. So we'll start with attachment. And when kids are wired to survive, they really are living, remember, they're living in that brainstem part of the brain. They're not really paying attention. There's not a whole lot of activity going on in the limbic system other than to activate the stress response. And certainly not a lot of activity in the thinking part of the brain, because their brain is really focused on living and surviving. And so what happens is we see a lot of times kids who will come to us even in preschool and kindergarten, and they're suspicious. They are really concerned about threat because their world has been threatening to them. And there's no reason for them to expect when they come to another environment that it's going to be different, because their world has just been dangerous. This will result, especially for those kids who have that predisposition to fight, this will result in defiant or aggressive behavior toward their peers, toward caregivers and other adults. For some kids who are really looking for that connection, they haven't had that with their primary caregivers, they will be they have just really very loose or inappropriate boundaries. So they're going to just immediately be best friends with anyone who shows them any interest. They're going to share information that they shouldn't, maybe wouldn't share otherwise. A lot of times these kids are unaware of their own emotions because they have had to suppress those emotions. Remember, if they're living in freeze, which is that constant, threat of life-threatening situations, then those emotions are shut down. And so they're unaware. If they are from backgrounds where there's a lot of physical abuse, they may be really attuned to other people's emotions because they've had to be to survive. Or if they constantly are living again in that freeze situation, they're not going to be attuned to other people's emotions, because reading emotions happens in the prefrontal cortex, and that part of the brain has not received that proper information, that proper wiring to be able to learn how to do that. They will typically not be very good at asking for help. They can be very needy and very demanding, or allow themselves to be victimized by others. They may isolate themselves because that's how they feel safe, or they may be so desperate for any type of connection that they engage in disruptive or attention-seeking behavior. And for kids who have been sexually abused, they may make inappropriate sexual attempts to gain that type of connection as well, because that's the only type of connection that they've known. So if you see these behaviors, really the question that you're asking is what has gone on in their other environments to create this. They have been wired for these behaviors. These are the behaviors that keep them safe. These are the behaviors that have allowed them to live to this point. So understanding that these behaviors are adaptive. They're very adaptive to their dysfunctional environment, which is typically the home environment. They will get in the way in other situations, but they haven't had the opportunity to learn how to live in a safe environment. So that's what we're here for. In terms of regulation, very often these young people are going to be very sensitive to physical contact, because physical contact has been inappropriate. It has been hurtful. It has been invasive. So we have to be really careful in our attempts to make physical contact with these young people. They're also going to show a lot of hypervigilance. So again, they're scanning their environment. They're living in that survival brain. They're scanning their environments for safety. Is this person safe? Can I get away? They may want to be in the exit. They may fight someone to be closer to the door. That is about a safety piece. It's not about being first. It's not about, being privileged. It's about, that's what I want. I want to be near the door to be safe. They're going to be easily distracted, especially if someone new comes into the room. They're going to lose their ability to focus on what's going on in front of them, because this is potentially a threat. This new person coming in, this new thing that's happening is a potential threat, and I need to assess that for safety. Can I be safe? A lot of times you're going to see kids they're going to be really jittery. Again, if they're living in the kind of sympathetic nervous system activation, the fight or flight, they're going to be jittery. They're going to have a lot of kind of energy because they're ready to either take off or stand and fight to keep themselves safe. But because this is a very difficult and taxing state to be in for our body, they're going to report a lot of times physical complaints that are due to not maybe physical problems, but due to this psychological stress. And we all know that when we're experiencing something that's very difficult emotionally, it does hurt us physically. So they may complain of stomach aches, they may complain of headaches, there's a lot of muscle tension, so they might be sore and they complain that their body hurts. All of this is because living in that fight or flight state is very, very taxing on the body. We've talked about this inability to be mindful because they're constantly scanning their environment for safety. And because all of this stuff gets in the way of typical development in a safe and caring environment, we may see dysregulations in bodily functions. So there may be some control issues around eating. There may be some issues around bedwetting, well beyond what we would expect of development, because again, they're just worried about being safe. Lastly, there are challenges to competency. And so a lot of times, anyone who has lived in a dysregulated, a dysfunctional and abusive upbringing is going to be very pessimistic, and they have this very hopeless outlook because they haven't had a lot of things to be positive about. This can happen at a really, really early age too, so that they, question their own self-being and their own self-worth. We think about the messages that kids receive about the world and about how things are supposed to be. Things are, there are two people in this world that are supposed to love you and care for you and keep you safe. And those messages get sent to kids early on in toddlerhood, in preschool, TV shows, books. It's all about mom and dad loving you and taking care of you. And they have all of these materials, all of the kids' books, all around, that's kind of geared around this safe world where these people love you and adults care for you and keep you safe. And when that's not the reality for a child who lives in an abusive home, then they self internalize that. It's like, this is about me, because everyone else in the world has people who love them. I don't. So there must be something wrong with me. And they kind of, like I said, they internalize that and they make that about themselves. So they question their own worth. And even when they encounter adults who are loving, who are appropriately caring, they're still going to question that because they question their own self-worth. It makes sense that they have difficulty with a lot of cognitive functioning. So developmental skills, tying their shoes, being able to do that, being able to read, say your numbers, say your colors. If we're talking about preschoolers, they just are constantly behind their peers when it comes to academics, and even just when it comes to emotional and social regulation and skills, they're behind because the brain has been really focused on keeping them safe. So we have to understand that a lot of times any type of abuse is going to hijack the brain's ability to focus on other skills, and kind of almost development is it stops, or it's kind of stuck at that stage that the abuse begins, and they haven't had the ability to learn all of the things that we think that they should know: how to get along, how to talk, how to ask for things, how to share, how to express their emotions, how to read the emotions of other people, because their world has not provided them with those opportunities to learn this. So what do? There are two very, very necessary conditions for any of us to be able to learn. So before the brain is able to learn, if we go back to, if you guys remember this, like I showed you the bell curve with the stress response, we need to be in that green area, which is all about being safe and having someone who cares about us so that we can be mindful, so that we can express compassion and empathy and learn and curiosity. So that safety is first and foremost. If we are not safe, then the part of the brain that's going to be activated is that survival brain, and that's all that it's worried about. It's not going to be worried about what somebody else feels, if we've hurt somebody else's feelings, what we're learning, whatever the lesson plan is for that day, because it's focused on safety. Once we have safety in place, then we move to that mid part of the brain, right? The emotional part of the brain, and we make connections because we pay attention and we learn better from people that we feel connected to. So we're going to talk about ways that we can kind of manage these two things and provide safety and connection for the young people that we're working with. And we're going to do this by understanding that we need to be able to read where that young person is, how they're responding, look at that behavior, and the behavior becomes, what is this about? What function does this behavior have? If they're being aggressive, if they're isolating themselves, then we look at that and say, this child doesn't feel safe. And then we need to speak to that survival part of the brain. And to be able to speak to the survival part of the brain, we have to use sensory experiences. If we want to be able to talk to that emotional part of the brain, the relational part of the brain, and make connections, then we have to engage in activities that are relational, that build on that connection. And only then can we get to the executive, the thinking part of the brain, where we can engage in verbal communication, look at written work, those types of things to help them learn that way. We're not going to be able to use verbal commands to calm a dysregulated child who is living in their survival state. We have to look at that behavior, be able to interpret which, where are they, and what do I need to do? What language, brain language, do I need to speak in order to engage with this child? And so that's kind of what we're going to focus on for the rest of this, are very, very specific techniques that we can use to speak to both the survival and the emotional part of the brain. Those are the two pieces that I'm going to focus on. I will give it you should have a attachment or a link to a document that will give you all of these things that I'm going to talk about, and many, many more. I only chose a few. Otherwise, this webinar would be really, really long. So I chose a few to kind of go over and kind of talk you through, give the instructions, but I am going to give you the document, the full document that has many, many more exercises for speaking both to the survival and the emotional part of the brain, as well as the executive, the thinking part of the brain. So that should be available to you through this particular session. All right. So we're going to talk about two different types of strategies that allow us to talk to the brain and really be able to calm kids and get them focused. So the first are focused attention practices. And the real kind of, so focused attention practices are all about calming the limbic system, calming that emotional part of the brain, calming the stress response, and that survival part of the brain to allow us to return to the parasympathetic nervous system, which is where we are calm, where we are regulated, where we can make those connections. So these are going to shut down that kind of stress response and allow us to return to kind of our regular, safe, state of being. It can activate attention, and it will certainly help with emotional regulation when we can do this. The other exercises that we're going to learn are what are called brain interval strategies. And these are going to specifically activate attention and focus. So it prepares the brain to learn. Once kids are calm, once they're in that parasympathetic state, once they feel safe and connected, we're going to activate attention. We're going to get their brain ready to learn. And it also can be used at the end of activities to help kind of hold on to the new material that we've learned. So the brain will continue to consolidate that new material and really kind of wire it into our brains so that we are going to remember those types of things. So first, we're going to focus on sensory brain aligned strategies. So both the focused attention and brain intervals. And so I'm going to go through these. And again, you guys are going to get a copy of this with instructions. So one of the things that works really well with, so breathing, let me just start by saying breathing is the best thing. The deep, slow breathing is the best thing that we can do to turn off the stress response system. So it's a slow breath in. It's always important that the exhale, your exhale is longer than the inhale. And there are lots of ways to do this. So younger kids like the horse lips, where you do a deep breath in, usually through the nose, and exhales are going to be through the mouth. So a deep breath in, and then your exhale with horse lips is now, little kids like this, elementary kids like this. Once you get to middle school kids are probably never going to do something like that, but you can do something like a snake breath. So again, a deep breath in where the belly rises, not the chest necessarily, but the abdomen is rising. And then like a snake breath is where you're forcing all of the air out of your lungs. It's impossible to do that one fast. So it's always going to slow the exhale down. You can also say, if not a snake, then like a balloon, like you're really slowly letting the air leak out of a balloon. So a deep inhale, filling the balloon, and then slowly letting the air out of that. Those are going to be really, really good ways to slow that breathing. If you have a young person who is very physical, so there is a lot of, hyperact, like you just see a lot of energy in their body, they're fidgety, those types of things, you can incorporate movement in that, where the arms go up on inhale and then they go down on exhale. That body movement is going to kind of get their body ready to let go of those things. There is another session that talks specifically about trauma and the body, and other strategies that you can do to release that physical tension that we hold on to due to stress and trauma. But that's a really easy way to do that. If you have a group that's hyperactive, then you can do rhythm circles. This doesn't take very long. You don't necessarily have to have drumsticks or anything for kids to beat on. You can just use your hands, where you as the leader establish some type of rhythm pattern that the kids follow. So it could be something simple as, and then they follow you. You can incorporate stomping in part of that, and it can be whatever you want it to be. And they just follow you. What this does, and rhythm works really, really well to really get the attention of that survival part of the brain, and to kind of to regulate it and deactivate that stress response. So you can do this again with a full group. If you have a kid that is just not, and they're not, when you are in crisis, when you're stressed out, we're not hearing things. There's a muscle in the middle part of the ear that kind of closes off and prevents us from hearing things that are going on. Just like it's too much, it's overwhelming. Typically in the freeze state, we're not hearing things anyway, so talking is not going to help, but rhythm really can. And you can just do, just kind of patting and get their attention. They get their attention, and then you can say, maybe you can do that too. And it just kind of calms them down. One of the other things that works really well is hand massage. So you can make sure that you have lotion available. If you get scented lotion, a lot of times lavender is a calming. So we can, let's engage both olfactory, which is our sense of smell, as well as our sense of touch, and put some lotion on, and we just you just rub it in. You just rub it in. If you don't have lotion, you can act like you're rubbing lotion in. And it's, again, this is a sensory way of getting the attention of that survival brain and kind of calming it down, just calming it down. You also can get, and I don't have this listed on here, but you can get a tennis ball, and you can use that tennis ball and roll it up and down your arms. You can roll it up and down your thighs. You can roll it across your back. Kids tend to really like this one. It is, again, very tactile. So, focused on touch and relieving some, especially if you do it back here. If kids hold their tension back here, it's almost like a little mini massage, and it will kind of release that. So 7-11 breathing is, and you may have to practice to get kids to this point, but it is an inhale for 7 seconds, again, usually through the nose, and an exhale, for 11 seconds, usually through the mouth. So as the leader, you would do the counting and say, okay, we're going to inhale for 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Out for 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And again, it's going to deactivate the stress response system. It's going to allow us to kind of calm back down. Our heart rate will decrease. Our breathing will decrease, that we're taking slower, deeper breaths. That's how we like to breathe anyway. It's the best way to breathe for our body. If you have kids who really respond to visual stimuli, you can do sensation word drawing. And with sensation word drawing, it is going to activate both the right hemisphere, which is really kind of all about arts and crafts, as well as the left hemisphere. So you're going to activate both of those, because you're going to basically just say, draw. You can use shape, size, colors, whatever, but draw tense, draw fuzzy, draw cold. And this is actually, you are integrating both Again, so the visual world written because we're thinking about the word in our brain, and then the visual piece. So that integration of all different types of sensations is going to be really, really important. One of the things that happens when kids are wired for survival is that they lose the ability to kind of integrate different sensations, different parts of the brain. And this will kind of build that integration in a really, really easy way to do. You tell the kids that, you know, this is not an art class. It doesn't have to look perfect, but draw what you think hot is. Draw what you think angry looks like. Giving them lots of choices to be able to do that. And that's going to, again, kind of incorporate all of this integration of these different parts of the brain and allow them to kind of make those connections between survival brain, emotional brain, and the thinking part of the brain. And we can increase and strengthen those connections so that in times of stress, those are there and they can access all parts of that. All right. More sensory brain aligned strategies include lots of breathing exercises. So again, we can talk about hot chocolate breathing. So we're breathing like we are going to cool off something that's hot. So deep breath in, and your exhale is like you're trying to cool something down. It's another way to slow down that exhale, which is really, really important. Bilateral scribbling is all about just you're not drawing anything, you're just scribbling vertically, horizontally with both hands, right, for 15 seconds. So back and back and forth, up and down. You're just scribbling this way. For older kids, you can have them write their name with their left hand or their right, whatever their dominant hand is. I say left because I'm left-handed. Switch to their non-dominant hand and then write their name. They can draw a flower with their dominant hand and then switch, draw a flower with their non-dominant hand. But again, a lot of what this does is it really begins to integrate the communication between both hemispheres. So the left part of the body is controlled by the right hemisphere. The right part of the body is controlled by the left hemisphere. When we're using them both, whether it's at the same time or we're switching back and forth, we're integrating communication between left hemisphere and right hemisphere. So you can do the scribbling, you can start to make dots, you can make circles, again, if you have both of the markers in your hand to be able to do that. But this is really about activating both parts of the brain, the left and the right hemisphere. For kids who really like tactile and touch experiences, we can do temperature sensation. And so you can try to change a person's body temperature by using ice chips, by drinking something that's warm. You can use a cool fan. You can use something that like wrapping up in a blanket to warm you up. But all of these things are going to be very focused on your sense of touch and that tactile, kind of calming things down. Another good one it's called emotional freedom technique, or tapping is not really sure why this works yet. I think a lot of it has to do with rhythm. So I say not sure from a neuroscience point of view, but research is looking into it, but I really think it has to do with the rhythm. So tapping is about, again, kind of taking control of your body and focusing on your body. A lot of times you might you prime yourself by hitting, so you're making a karate chop, but it's this part. So you will tap here. I'm usually saying like repeating a phrase in your mind. So it could be something like, it really makes me mad when someone interrupts me, but I can be patient. It really makes me mad when someone interrupts me, but I can be patient. It really makes me mad when someone interrupts me, but I can be patient. So you usually do it 3 times. And then you begin the tapping. So as you see on the screen here, in a certain order, repeating. I like to repeat the positive part of this. Sometimes instructions say repeat the negative piece, but I like the positive, focus on the positive. I can be patient. 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 Kids, little kids like to do the under the arms this way because you look like a monkey when you're doing it. A lot of times, though, middle school and teenagers, adults like to do it this way. And you just repeat that until you feel calm. I can be patient. 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 That rhythmic repetition of something positive really is calming. It may take kids different, so sometimes they only have to do it 2 or 3 times before they finally feel calm. Sometimes if they're really agitated, it might take a little bit longer. I will tell you, for older kids, they may need some, somewhere not around their peers to do that because they don't like that type of attention. But it really does work. It really is very, very calming. If you have a chime bowl, then a lot of times this is, again, a group thing, something that you can do with the group, where you would just hit the chime bowl and you listen to the tone, and then you try to match it by humming. And then you would just kind of get quieter as the chime bowl gets quieter. You can do that 2 or 3 times. A lot of times you're going to follow this with 3 deep breaths, right? So we're going to, take your deep breaths, and then, we can even incorporate that into the humming piece. So take a deep breath, hit the chime bowl. And your exhale is waking up that singing bowl, waking and matching that chime bowl there. Again, this is going to, a lot of times you can have kids close their eyes so that they are actually shutting off any other type of sensory information coming in, and what they're focused at, that you want to make sure they're comfortable, right? So they're not worried about their body. That what they're focused on is the sound. Hearing that and being able to match that, right? When kids get there and that kind of fades and they don't hear it anymore, you can have them raise their hand, and then everybody's kind of calm. You know that your group is ready to start, to whatever the next activity is as well. And then the last on this slide is taking a sensory bath. This is typically going to be done, you can do this individually. You can do this with a small group of kids where you have a large beach towel, you have a large, like a loofah, so like something that you can use, a scrub, lotion, right? And they can take the loofah, they can put it on there, you can kind of just really pretend to take a bath by washing different parts. They can talk about, this is relaxing. This is, I can feel the stress releasing. Again, they can kind of use the towel to kind of dry out, but it's about feeling and being in touch with their body so that they're processing this. If you have a kid who's been sexually abused or assaulted, they may feel uncomfortable doing this around other people. But that might be something that's really helpful on their own with a little bit of privacy. You just have to gauge and how comfortable this feels for students. And sometimes they have to get used to it, but it's about getting in touch with your body. All right. There are also tension release exercises. And again, I'm going to share a lot more information about this in the other session that I'm doing about body trauma and healing. But we do hold tension, we do hold stress in our bodies. A lot of the newer research in neuroscience is focused on the fact that our bodies are as affected, if not more, by stress and trauma, and we really need to focus on body and releasing this in our body. So tension release exercises are going to help take care of that. It really is kind of about focusing on different parts of our body, creating some stress, and then doing a release. The document that is attached that you guys will have access to, there are several different ones. You can do ones with the toes, you can do ones with your ankles, with your hips. I like the one that you do with your arms because I tend to hold stress and tension up here. So what that would look like is you press your palms together as hard as you can, and you hold that. Eventually what's going to happen, if you guys can see this, my hands are shaking. I'm not doing that on purpose. It's going to really begin to shake the longer I hold this. It's using those muscles. It's kind of, I'm using the muscles where I typically hold tension. It's creating this ability to get rid of that tension and then release. It's, if you do it for a long period, it can be, you work up a sweat doing it, but it releases that tension that you hold. And just for that little bit that I did, I already can tell a difference in my neck and in my shoulders, because that's where I hold the tension. This is something that other animals do after a stressful response. So you'll see this a lot in like deer, elk, the gazelles that are chased by the lions out in the wild. And once they're safe, they do this whole body shaking, and it is a release of that tension. It's a way for them, their body's like, okay, whew, that's gone, that's over. Now I can return to parasympathetic functioning. Now I can return to kind of the healthy state of being, to focus and to make connections. And we don't do that as much as humans. We don't have that opportunity. A lot of times our stressors are not things that allow us that physical exertion to get away. We're not running away from stuff as much anymore. We tell our kids don't fight, but that we're still holding that tension in our bodies. If you, when we're activated, when our stress response is activated, and you are one of those flight people, so predisposed to being fearful, anxious, anxiety, then probably you're going to feel that tension in your lower back because you're getting ready to run. It's a stress response. It's fascinating. The stress response it automatically activates the muscles in our hips, in our buttocks, and in our thighs to be able to run. And if we're not running away from something, that tension never goes away unless we are engaging in these tension release exercises. Another really cool, easy thing that kids like to do, it's another tactile sensory strategy, is peaceful brushing. And so you can get a makeup brush. You can just get a regular paintbrush that is clean, that doesn't have paint on it, obviously. And you just brush your body, brush your arms, brush your face, whatever part of the body that feels good, where you just take that and you just take that brush and then just use, your ears, around your neck, do your arms, do your fingers and your palms. That is a really calming, nice sensation. And again, it's going to deactivate stress response. Lotus flower breathing, another breathing exercise, is going to be where you place the fingertips of both of your hands together on inhale. You're going to pull your thumbs apart. And then on exhale, you bring them back together. All right. So inhale, they come apart. Exhale, you bring them back together. This is just another way to slow that breathing, to focus on breathing. If any of you guys are familiar with Dr. Bruce Perry, who is really an expert in helping children heal from trauma, he says that breathing is one of the best things that you can teach them, because it will deactivate that stress response. It will kind of, allow us the survival part of the brain to calm back down and allow us to access the emotional part of the brain, the thinking part of the brain. And so all of these breathing exercises are great strategies that will really turn off that stress response. Again, if you've got kids who hold their stress physically, yoga poses are a great way to activate the body and allow. So, yoga poses, any type of stretching, up, out, you can roll your shoulders back, you can roll your shoulders forward. I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with yoga poses. You can look this stuff up online and get lots of different yoga poses to do, but just kind of, it's all about stretching. You want to make sure that you tell your kids, don't hurt yourself, stretch to, to where you feel tension, but not pain. And again, this is going to be, if they're not used to doing this, it takes a while to kind of get used to. You will see an increase in flexibility if you do this on a regular basis. But it really is it's all about stretching. It's all about, so a lot of times yoga is cross. So you take one hand and you cross over and touch the floor on the other side. Again, that's going to that kind of what we call cross lateral work from one side of the body to the other side of the body is going to activate both hemispheres and start that integration process as well. Tongue talking is, you might have a hard time getting some of your middle schoolers to do this, but this is when you start to, when you put your tongue on the top of your mouth, and then you can talk. And you might just say something like, this is going to be a great day. We're going to have lots of energy and today's going to be fun. And you just repeat this. And you as the leader are going to do this first. So that it shows kids that it's okay to be silly. It's okay to do this. We're never asking kids to do anything that we're not willing to do ourselves. So you just say, this is going to be a great day. It sounds funny, but it also, as we do this stuff, we show, and especially if it's, like the tapping, like you're going to be a monkey, or the horse lips, or this is going to be a great day. It's, it's like we look silly, but that vulnerability, our ability to be vulnerable, our ability to be silly allows that for the kids. It gives them permission to be vulnerable themselves. And so it's going to increase kind of our connection, which we're going to talk about some of those too. Regulated pacing is kind of what it sounds like. So an antsy, fidgety kid that can get up, and you have an established pathway in your classroom, in your whatever your activity area, where they just are going to walk, and they just walk. Sometimes you just need to get that physical exercise out, or if they really need that slow, calming sensation, have a rocking hammock. It may be, if you guys aren't comfortable with hammocks, it can be a rocking chair, but there's just something naturally calming. Part of it, again, is the rhythm about rocking. This is why we rock our babies. It works when we rock because there's something naturally calming about rocking. If you've ever noticed or worked with kids, especially younger ones who have been traumatized, who have been abused in some way, they rock naturally. That could be their calming strategy. So if you've got a kid who's rocking, that could be an indication that they're self-soothing, that this is part of what they're trying to do to calm themselves down. Sometimes we have to teach kids this though as well. So these are all kind of talking to that survival part of the brain. It's like, calm down, things are safe, in a safe environment. You're not going to ask kids to do this in a chaotic environment because that's going to be counterproductive to them. If things are chaotic, if things are stressful for them, then they're not going, it's like there's other stuff going on around and you haven't taken care of this external stuff, then it's going to be difficult for them to do any of these things because that still presents a threat. But as a group, you can do, you can do regulated pacing as a group. You can do the rhythms circles as a group. You can do all of the deep breathing exercises, the stretching. There are lots of these things that you can do individually. You can do as a group to help create kind of this safe space for kids in your programming. All right. The last thing, and this is something that you may have to spend a little bit of time and a little bit of money putting together, is what we, so they're known as either amygdala reset stations or calming stations. And this is, again, about creating a specific space in your building, in your facility, in your classroom, to allow them to engage in those sensory experiences. And so these are things that you can actually put in there. Have a glitter wand that, where the glitter goes back up and down, and you can make those at home. It doesn't have to be something that you buy. You can make those with an empty, Coke bottle and water and glitter. You can do that. You can have stress balls, a balance board, like something that's low on the ground. You can have an exercise or a yoga ball with mats. If they're going to lay down, you want to make sure that they are safe, that's padded. You can have those constellation night lights are really calming. There's something to look at. A lot of times those are accompanied by music. So you're going to get 2 for 1, right? You get the visual as well as the auditory. You can have, this says liquid motion timers. You can have table mazes. The stacking cups are always, kids like to do the stacking cups. Again, that's going to engage the use of their body. And it is it's visual as well, because they have to be able to look at that visual pattern for stacking. There are books that you can use, coloring books. I don't know about any of you guys, but I love to color as a calming mechanism. And it's just something that's really soothing about that. And then it's also visually appealing when we do that. You can have bubbles, Play-Doh, the stress balls are going to be really helpful. If you use music, a lot of times kids need to block out what's going on in their environment. So you can have either noise canceling headphones, or you can have headphones that will connect to music. Usually you want to do something that is only instrumental, or if it is words, then it's really positive message words. And a slow beat. So not something that's fast, because that's not going to be relaxing. That's going to be something that's energizing. So usually something that's under around 80 beats or 60 beats per minute, not over 80. I already talked about hand lotion. Puzzles are really good because that's going to be visual and tactile as well. Sometimes kids like numbers, so you can do Sudoku. All of these things have water there. Water should be everywhere to keep kids hydrated anyway. But all of these things, if you're trying these different things out and you know that this works well for kids, then incorporate that into that calming, the amygdala reset station. Kids can go, they can calm back down, and then they can come back to you. And it's important when you are using these strategies for the kids to know that this is not a way out of the expectations. A lot of times kids get, their stress response gets activated when we're asking them to do something that's challenging or something that they feel like they can't do. That's extremely stress inducing for them. So maybe they have to calm back down, but they still have to do it. And so we have to make sure that they understand that, yes, they can engage in any of these strategies. Yes, they can go to the amygdala reset station, the calming station, but they still have to do the work. So that expectation is always there. It's not a way out of whatever it is that we expect them to do. All right. I want to cover a few connection strategies as well, because connection is as important. Remember, we have to be safe and we have to feel connected in order to learn. And so I want to kind of include a little bit of these. And there's so many more that you guys are going to get with this document that I've attached. But I want to cover some of them. So the 2x10 is where you just spend 2 minutes every day for 10 days in a row, and that's important, the in a row is important, having a conversation about anything that the kid is interested in. You know, it can be about their favorite video game, it can be about a movie they watched, it can be about relationships or schoolwork, but it is youth initiated, right? It's about something that they want to talk about. It's the time that you're taking, though, that's really, really important. Catch Me is really about kind of that positive reinforcement, especially with teenagers. The brain is wired as in adolescence to respond more to reward than it is to consequences. And so catch them being good, just saying something to them, maybe writing them a note if we don't want to call them out in front of kids or in front of other peers or whatever. But it's just real. And this is something that anybody can do, where you just kind of, catch them being good and then, and express your gratitude for it. You can assign a caring buddy, and this can be another staff member or maybe another student that's really good at self-regulating, and where they're just kind of there for them, and they can again write positive notes through post-its, sometimes maybe just a smile, sometimes it's just checking in, how you doing, and that they know that somebody's always there for them, which is really the message, the important part of that. Monster drawing is where you take turns with a partner drawing a monster, and one person draws one line and then the other person draws. And so you're building, it's like a cooperative building exercise. So I might draw a circle, someone else is going to draw a pointy ear, maybe a triangle that ends up being an ear. I'll draw the other ear. Someone draws a nose in the middle, so another circle. But it's just that kind of, again, we're taking turns. We are waiting on the other person. It's very interdependent. For kids who have not had that in their lives as children, that interdependence is, this is something that you have to learn. Typically, we learn this as infants when we have caring, nurturing adults. But when that's not the case, these are all things that have to be learned. We have to give them opportunities to learn the things that they did not have the opportunity to learn because of not in any fault of their own, because of things that were going on in their environment for their caregivers, whether it's a mental illness, a substance abuse issue, it could just be that the parents working 2 or 3 jobs to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. Again, nobody's at fault, but we have to give them opportunities to learn these types of things. Noticing is another form of catch me, but there's actually kind of, where we would write it out. You notice, is that a new, it's not, about catching them being good. It's noticing that they got a new haircut. Maybe they have a new shirt and they haven't worn it to program before, and you notice that, or new shoes, or they're wearing their hair different, or maybe they're just more cheerful, or maybe they're more down, and you just notice. And and with older kids, they can also notice with us, so it can go both ways. And that again is going to strengthen that connection. You may have to set ground rules. We want to be, this is constructive. This is, supposed to be kind. This is supposed to be about, showing caring. So you can say, I've noticed you really seem grumpier than usual. Is something going on? It's noticing something that maybe not be pleasant, but it's done in a very helpful, supportive manner. And older kids can, really they like that ability to do kind of the back and forth piece there. So again, just kind of making sure that young people know that they're seen and know that they're being heard. So that this is the seeing piece. The heard piece, being heard and listened to, is through touch points. So these are just check-ins where you just, whether it's every morning before they're leaving, but at some point you're just kind of checking in. How are things going? How are you feeling today? It could be as simple as, or Yeah, they don't even, you don't have to use words, but you're just kind of checking in, seeing how students are, seeing how the kids are with different things. I love the positive referrals, especially if we're working in settings where we have someone else in authority deal with negative behaviors. So this works really, really well in schools, and kids get sent to the principal's office, and the principal's always this like negative figure who's like the authority and taking care of problems. What if we established positive relationships with those other people, and we sent them to the social worker, or we sent them, they went to the counselor because they did something really, really great. They go to the principal's office because they were really helpful, or because we knew that they were struggling, but they kept it together while they were with us. And we're, recognizing this, and then we're bragging on them. So that positive referral piece. And again, they're going to be, they're going to be felt. They feel like they're being listened to, that they're being heard around that. So, and remember, teenagers are going to respond more positively to rewards than they do consequences, just based upon the simple fact that the limbic system is fully developed before the prefrontal cortex, and prefrontal cortex can take as long as the mid to late 20s to develop. And so we're going to kind of focus on that connection piece, and the reward system is in the limbic system. So it's fully developed. There's a lot of power in just asking questions. So if we notice that someone is struggling, we can say things like, what do you need? How can I help? Is there a way that we can make this better? Is there anything that you need that would ease your mind or make you feel better? Do you want to draw something out? Is there something other than talking that we can do this? If you could list 3 or 4 people that you need right now, who would they be? And hopefully that's somebody within the program, that they have that connection. Maybe it's not you in that moment of stress. Maybe it's not you in that moment of despair. It's somebody else. And having that person there, is there a place that you could go where you would, that you feel like you could calm down, that would make you feel better? Are there things that you need that would bring you comfort? But just asking that. And then once they're outside of that moment of stress, outside of that moment of anxiety or whatever it was, what else can we add to this in those moments that would make you feel better? What was difficult for you? And how can, are there strategies around navigating that difficulty? What was the best thing that could have happened? What was the worst thing that could have happened? All of these questions are going to, so we're talking about something that was difficult, which automatically activates the limbic system, that emotional part of the brain. But when they're calm and we're talking about this, we also are able, by asking these questions, to engage the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of the brain, and strengthen those relationships, strengthen that wiring and those connections between emotion and the thinking part of the brain, which controls our emotional responses. And that doesn't happen naturally. That happens only with experience. So, kids who haven't had anyone who talk through these things with them are not going to have the ability to really have that emotional control. We know adults like this, where they haven't had that control. So it's going to really kind of create those connections between the emotional part of the brain and the thinking part of the brain. When kids are feeling stressed, when they are feeling, threatened or angry, or they're fearful, whatever it is, it's really important to validate those feelings. Teenagers feel emotions more intensely than any other period of time. So it's really important that we validate those feelings, that we don't dismiss those feelings, because we will lose our ability to connect with a young person if we're dismissing. So validating can be things like saying, that must have made you feel really angry. Wow, how hard that must be. You can even say, that messed up. That's messed up. That stinks. That's frustrating. What a horrible feeling. What a tough spot to be in. That must be really discouraging. Tell me more about that. So all of these things, you guys are going to, again, get a list of this with some different things that you can say in there, but you're actually, again, they're feeling seen and heard, because we are validating what they're feeling. They know that we understand and we're not dismissing them, and it creates that connection. So this says coffee breaks. I use that just because saying coffee breaks is easier than saying, hot chocolate breaks or water breaks or whatever it is. But it's just the time that we take to just kind of chill, reflect. If we do this collectively, we can talk about, feelings. We can talk about what was easy, what was difficult, and the activities or the exercises that we did. We can share appreciations, but it's just really about taking time to connect and to be there with one another and to listen to. So we're not making judgments about it. We're not fixing, we're just hearing. We're just listening, validating, nodding. Sometimes we don't even have to use words. We can just nod. We can just use our facial expressions. But just really the opportunity to reflect with one another, to be supportive, and it's about taking time. That's really what coffee breaks are about. They're about taking time. Kindness letters are things that we can do where we, again, it's another way of noticing, but we're taking the time to sit down and write a note to someone who has been especially kind. We can even say especially helpful, especially controlled, whatever what is that we want to do. It's all positive. It's and just another way to show that we're noticing that we appreciate their efforts, that we appreciate what they're doing. For kids who are coming in, maybe, and then I think this next one, the load I carry, is especially useful, like on a Monday. At the beginning, or whatever the beginning of your programming of the week is for them, because a lot of times kids come in dysregulated because home has been difficult, home has been chaotic. They don't have that kind of peace, that peaceful place. So at the beginning of the week, maybe we just sit down and they can draw, they can write a list. It depends on what they want to do. Sometimes they might bring objects in that represent the things that they're carrying with them this week. It could be that someone, they lost someone due to a breakup, due to a death, due to incarceration, due to moving, but there's, that one person's not there anymore, or they had a really difficult time. But this gives them the opportunity to tell us where they are in their world. And it gives us the opportunity to know that we don't want to add to that load. Their load is already really, really heavy. And a lot of times based upon, on things that are completely beyond their control. Maybe they didn't have enough to eat. Maybe they didn't get to sleep because it was, they live in a really noisy neighborhood that, or whatever. Maybe there was gunshots that weekend and they're scared, or, somebody's sick. But that's all things that are going to impact their ability to be with us and their ability to function. So understanding what it is that they're carrying, and we can do this too. We can share. Again, we want to lead by example. So we're doing these things as well. And there's nothing wrong with, you've had a really hard weekend of saying, this is the load that I carry this week. So understand, because kids are incredibly, incredibly compassionate. And so, we understand, they understand, but it really is about kind of knowing how we can respond to them and the supports that they need. And we're not going to add to that burden unnecessarily. Pockets of brilliance. This is about kind of survival strengths. This is really about helping kids understand how their ability to survive adverse experiences, to survive that chaotic, dysfunctional, abusive home is a strength. These are strengths. The fact that they can have a smile on their face, that they still trust individuals, that they still can get homework done, that they still show up. that they still come to school. All of these are strengths, and helping them recognize that. Collar emotions, again, are going to be kind of the, so if we, they can choose their own collars. We sometimes have like this, they say, red is anger, red is passion, but they get to choose their emotions and they just paint it. And then they can talk about, this is, so my page is mostly yellow because yellow is hopeful and yellow is happy for me. And that's where I am right now. Or maybe most of the page is black and brown because the world just looks dangerous and dark, and not a fun place to be in. But they choose their colors, but they talk about what that is around that. Sometimes it's easier to, just to write down stuff and get rid of it. And so that's what the Post-it worries are about. So I'm worried about all of these things, and it's keeping me from focusing on activities or what I'm supposed to do right now. So for now, I'm going to write all my worries on Post-it notes, and I'm going to put it on a wall, and they're going to stay there. Maybe I put it in my folder and I, fold and I close the folder and put it away to allow me to focus on what I'm going to do. It's not that they've gone away. They're still there. It's just that we're not going to focus on those right now. And sometimes that act of being able to do that and put something away is so significant and allows them, they're being felt, they're being heard, they're being seen. We know that it's there, but we're going to put it away right now to focus on what's going on. So sometimes that's going to work, usually with older kids than younger kids, but just being able to kind of put it away. And then the outline of me is kind of creating a life-size cutout. So you have kids lay down and you use like package paper, sometimes you can get the big kind of, what they call that, butcher paper, where you can get on the big roll and they lay down and you do the outline. And then they can, they fill it in. What's going on with them, what's going on inside. Maybe their stomachs are really big because they're hungry. Maybe they've got lightning bolts in their head because they've got a headache, but whatever it is, it's another way for them to acknowledge what's going on inside themselves, for us to understand what's going on with that. So again, these are just a few of multiple strategies that will be available in that document that you guys have access to. If you have any trouble with that, again, please let me know and I'll make sure that you get that. My email again is rdonaldson@indy, S as in Sam, B as in boy.org. With these things, not everything is going to work for everyone. So know that. Don't expect that you're going to do one activity and this is going to be great and it's going to make the world of difference. You have to experiment. You kind of have to explore with all of these things. You want to make sure that you don't do the same thing over and over and over again. Maybe something works really, really well, so you just find another way to do it, so that there's a little bit of variety there, because we do habituate, we get used to stuff, and it kind of loses its its effectiveness. But experiment, explore, mix things up. You want to track and assess what works, especially if you are working with a child that may be really dysregulated, having a lot of difficult and challenging behaviors. Just try all of these things. This worked and this was the response. And so we know that maybe you, through looking at that assessment, you're tracking and assessing, that you can see patterns, that it's the rhythmic things that work really well for this child. It's the tactile, touch things that work really, really well for this child. So you're trying all of these things, but you're tracking it so that you know what works. For you as the lead and kind of facilitator, and for the kids, this does require practice, and we kind of master these abilities over time. And the kids can reach the point where they're leading these things. You can kind of make things up, and it's a variation on something that you've done as well. And we had to do this in my neuroscience class, where we were leading. We always started with focused attention or brain align, brain intervals to kind of get us ready. And sometimes we just, made up things based upon what worked for us in the past. So I always like to do the melting butter, just because you can't be stressed. It's a way to kind of release that tension. If I'm melting butter, then, my shoulders automatically go down. I lose, the tension in my muscles because, you get soft and you kind of lose all of your kind of rigidity when you're melting butter or a limp noodle or whatever it is. So practice, and eventually kids can lead these, which is great because that gives them ownership, it gives them accountability, it gives them a sense of competence as well, and connection, all of those things, and attachment, all of these things that we really want to be able to provide our kids with. So that is all that I have. Like I said, I am going to give you guys, you should have the link for this Brain Aligned Strategies handout with this session. I do want to mention that IYSA at some point will be offering the Applied Neuroscience Training of Trainers. So I have, one of the things that I had to do for my certification was to develop a training of trainers. We got to choose our projects. I decided to do a training of trainers that I will do for direct care staff. And this will be, you'll have access to PowerPoints, you'll have access to materials. We will go through a lot of these in much more detail. We will actually teach you how to teach neuroscience to kids so that they understand these types of things. So look for information on that probably later on in the fall, maybe even in 2022. But that, so look for that. If that's something that you're interested in, you might email me and let me know. So I've said my email a number of different times, but here it is again, just so that you have that. And that concludes this session. So thank you for staying with me, and I hope that you found this information available. I do want to remind you that as a participant, please complete that evaluation, because that has to be completed in order for you to get your certificate of attendance for this particular training. There are those additional documents that will be available, and any questions that you have about this particular presentation, any questions about accessing other materials, feel free to email me at rdonaldson@ndsb.org. Thank you again for attending the 2021 IYSA Professional Development Retreat. We look forward to seeing you in our future sessions.